On Christmas Eve in 1945, a fire began in a quiet house on a hill in Fayetteville, West Virginia, and by sunrise, one ordinary American family had stepped into one of the most haunting mysteries in the country's history. The Sodder family lived in a modest home along Route 16, just outside town, where the winter air was sharp, the nights were dark, and life moved at the pace of hard work. George Sodder had spent years building a life in America after leaving Italy as a young man. He was a truck driver, a businessman, and a father of 10 children. His wife, Jenny, kept the house running with the kind of discipline that only large families know. Their days were full of noise, chores, arguments, laughter, and the constant struggle of making enough from very little. They were not rich, they were not famous. They were the kind of family that usually disappears into history without a trace. But history did not let them stay ordinary. That Christmas Eve had the strange calm of a night that would later be remembered for the wrong reasons. 5 of the Sodder children were still awake late into the evening. 4 others had already gone to bed. The family had guests, and the house was alive with the low hum of holiday conversation. The children played, the adults talked, and nothing seemed unusual enough to warn anyone that the night was about to break apart forever. Then one of the children noticed smoke. At first, the family assumed it was something small, a bit of ash, a stove issue, a minor problem that could be handled quickly. But the smoke became fire, and the fire became panic, and what happened next would be argued over for decades. George tried to get water from the cistern, but the pump would not work. Jenny tried to reach the sleeping children upstairs. The adults shouted. The flames climbed faster than anyone expected. By the time the family understood the full danger, the house was becoming an inferno. George and Jenny managed to get some of the children out. The guests escaped, but 5 children were unaccounted for: Morris, Martha, Louie, Jenny, and Betty. Somewhere inside that burning house, or somewhere beyond it, they had vanished. Firefighters were called, but not in time to save the home. When they arrived, the house was already collapsing into ruin. By morning, all that remained was blackened debris, twisted metal, and questions that no one could answer with confidence. The official assumption was brutal in its simplicity. The 5 missing children had died in the fire. But the Sodders never accepted that story. Even on the morning after the fire, details began to feel wrong. George said he could not believe the children were trapped inside. He had been certain that at least some of them should have been able to escape. Jenny felt it too, a mother's certainty that does not come from evidence, but from instinct so deep it can feel like a warning. The family searched the ruins. Neighbors looked. Authorities looked. Yet no clear remains were found. No certainty settled over the ashes. The absence itself became the first clue that something about this fire was not ordinary. Then the strange details started stacking up. There was the broken ladder that should have been available, but had somehow been unusable. There was the missing pulley truck, which the family later believed had been tampered with. There was the telephone line, which failed at the worst possible moment. There was the question of whether the fire truly behaved like a house fire should have. And there was the deeper unease that someone, somewhere, may have known more than they were saying. In the days after the fire, witnesses came forward with fragments of possibility. One person claimed they saw the missing children in a car. Another said they observed unfamiliar movement near the property. A different witness described seeing a truck with men at the scene. The accounts did not fit neatly together, but they also did not fit neatly with the official conclusion. Instead, they formed something worse, a pattern of uncertainty. A set of details that could not prove anything, but also would not go away. George Sodder began to suspect that the fire had not simply destroyed his home. He began to suspect that it had been used. That suspicion changed everything. The Sodders were not the type of family to quietly surrender to grief. George started asking questions and refusing to stop. Jenny kept the missing children's rooms as they were, as if preserving them might preserve hope. The family gathered what they could from the ruins and studied every inch of the aftermath. When authorities moved on, the Sodders did not. They kept looking, kept listening, kept paying attention to every rumor, every sighting, every whispered possibility that might have pointed to the truth. And then came the photograph. Years later, the family received a strange image from someone who claimed it might show one of the missing boys. The child in the photo had features that some family members believed resembled Louis, one of the missing children. But the photograph raised more questions than it answered. Where was it taken? Who sent it? Why now? Was it genuine, or was it another cruel fragment in a story built from pain? The Sodders treated the photograph not as closure, but as evidence that the case remained alive. If one child might still be out there, then all of them might be. They put up a billboard along the road, displaying the faces of the missing children. They offered a reward. They followed rumors. They contacted investigators. They spoke to anyone who claimed to know anything. Over time, the story spread beyond West Virginia, but not enough to solve it. That is often how true mysteries behave. They ignite public attention for a moment, then fade into the background, while the people closest to them keep living inside the wound. Years passed. The house was gone, but the absence of the children never left. Holidays became reminders. Birthdays became reminders. Every family gathering carried the shadow of the 5 seats that remained empty. George and Jenny had to live in a world where the official explanation told them to stop searching, while every instinct they had told them to keep going. And the longer they searched, the stranger the surrounding details became. Some investigators and writers later pointed to the possibility that the fire had been set. Others wondered whether there had been an accident followed by a cover-up. Some believed the children died in the house, but that something about the intensity of the fire destroyed the remains. Others believed the children had been taken, possibly for reasons that were never fully uncovered. The case became a collision of theories, each one trying to explain what happened, and none of them able to seal the cracks. That is what made the Sodder mystery endure. It was not just that the children disappeared. It was that the disappearance happened inside a disaster that should have left answers behind, but did not. The years after the fire became a quiet American tragedy. George died still believing that his children had not simply perished in the flames. Jenny lived with the same ache, the same uncertainty, the same refusal to accept a story that never felt complete. Families grieve in different ways, but for the Sodders, grief was fused with investigation. They were not only mourning, they were searching. And there was something almost unbearable in that. Because in many mysteries, the pain ends when the facts are finally known. But in this case, the facts never lined up cleanly enough to let the family rest. The fire on Christmas Eve became a wound in the American memory, a case that experts studied, readers debated, and amateur sleuths revisited again and again. Yet even with all the attention, the center of the story stayed hidden. 5 children vanished from a house fire. No definitive explanation ever closed the case. No final answer ever brought the family peace. Think about that for a moment. A home full of children, a holiday night, flames in the dark, a mother who kept insisting something was wrong, a father who refused to let the official version become the final version, a photograph that may or may not have shown one of the missing boys years later, witnesses whose memories complicated the story instead of solving it, a billboard on the roadside calling out to the lost as if the road itself might carry an answer home. That is the kind of story that stays in the mind because it never gives the mind what it wants most: closure. The Sodder case remains powerful not because it is loud, but because it is unfinished. The mystery is not built from fiction. It is built from real fear, real love, real loss, and the terrifying possibility that a single night can split a family into before and after forever. The fire itself was only the beginning. The true horror was everything that came after: the silence, the uncertainty, the endless search, and the possibility that somewhere far from the ashes, the truth might have lived on without ever being found. Somewhere in that story is the shape of every parent's worst fear. Somewhere in it is the stubbornness of hope. Somewhere in it is the failure of facts to explain a human tragedy. And somewhere in it is the reason people still return to the Sodder family again and again, because they want the same thing the family wanted: a final answer, a door opened, a name spoken, a truth that can end the darkness. But history did not give them that gift. All it left was a house that burned, 5 children who were never fully accounted for, and a family that spent the rest of its life staring into the same empty place, waiting for the missing pieces to come home.